Today is going to be a little bit different because usually we are looking outward. We're talking about history or, some new tech trend or the economy.
But today we're turning that lens inward.
And I don't mean inward in a spiritual, meditate on a mountaintop kind of way. I mean literally inside the machinery of your own body.
It is the machinery that allows you to be listening to this right now. Maybe you're walking the dog, maybe you're driving, or maybe you're just reaching out to grab a cup of coffee.
That coffee cup, let's stick with that. It feels like the simplest thing in the world. I see the cup, I want the caffeine, I grab the cup. It feels instantaneous. It feels easy.
And it feels easy because the system works. But if you actually, peel back the hood and look at the physiology, that simple act, picking up that cup, is a symphony.
A symphony.
It is. It's a massive coordinated military operation involving millions of electrical signals, a strict hierarchy of command, and a biological gyroscope in your skull that keeps you from falling on your face while you do it.
Okay, so that's where we're going today. We are diving deep into Chapter 56 of our source material, titled Cortical and Brainstem Control of Motor Function.
It sounds a bit dry, but I promise you it's anything but.
And our mission is pretty specific. We want to map the journey of a thought becoming an action. We want to know how a flicker of electricity in the boss part of the brain travels down the wires, fights gravity, and ends up moving a muscle in your pinky finger.
And we aren't just skimming the surface here. We are going to unpack every single line of this text because the details are where the magic is. We're going to look at how the brain plans complex skills like playing the piano, why strokes cause the specific damage they do.
And how a tiny sensor in your ear effectively predicts the future.
Yes, that part is incredible.
I love that line, predicts the future. It sounds like science fiction, but it's actually anatomy. But before we get to the time-traveling ear, we need to establish the chain of command because the brain isn't just a blob of jelly that all fires at once, right? There's a hierarchy.
Absolutely. Think of the motor system like a massive corporation or maybe a military command structure. It helps to have an analogy.
Okay, I like that. Let's run with it.
At the very top, you have the cerebral cortex, specifically the motor cortex. This is the CEO. This is the general. It initiates voluntary movement. It says, I have decided we are going to pick up that coffee cup.
So it makes the big strategic decision.
Okay,
so the cortex is the boss in the penthouse suite. Who are the middle managers?
right below the cortex, you have the brainstem. This is the foundation. If the cortex is the CEO, the brainstem is the facility manager. It handles all the things the CEO doesn't want to think about.
Like keeping the lights on.
Exactly. Breathing, heart rate, and crucially for our discussion today, standing up against gravity.
So the CEO says go, but the facility manager makes sure the building doesn't collapse while the CEO is walking out the door.
I see, precisely. And then you have the spinal cord, that's the cabling system. It carries the messages from the brain to the muscles.
But it's not just a passive wire, is it?
Not at all. It has its own little local circuits reflexes that can act without the brain even knowing, like pulling your hand from a hot stove.
And sitting off to the side, providing data to everyone.
You have the vestibular system, that's the sensor array in your inner ear. It's the gyroscope, providing real-time data to everyone else so they don't tip over.
Okay, I like this structure. The corporation, CEO, facility manager, wiring, and the sensor team. Let's start at the top. The commander. The motor cortex. If I'm pointing to my head right now trying to find this CEO, where am I pointing?
Well, take your hand and place it over the top of your head, essentially like where a headband would sit. Maybe push it back just a little bit.
Okay.
Anatomically, we are talking about the posterior 1/3 of the frontal lobes. It sits right in front of a deep groove in the brain called the central sulcus.
And the text breaks the CEO office down into 3 distinct subdepartments, which I think is really important.
It is. It's crucial because they have very different job descriptions. The first one, and the one most people think of, is the primary motor cortex.
This is the main executioner, the one who actually sends the final order.
That's right. And this is where we see that famous, slightly terrifying map, right? The homunculus.
Yes. Figure 5:6:1 and 5:6:2 in the text. I always find this thing so bizarre to look at.
It's a cross-section of the brain.
Yeah.
If you were to electrically stimulate this strip of brain tissue, point by point, you would see specific parts of the body twitch. But the map is laid out in a way that, well, let's just say it wasn't designed by an interior decorator.
Right. It's not intuitive at all. Walk us through the geography. If I start at my ear and go up over the top of my head, what am I hitting?
Okay, imagine we were starting on the side of the brain near what's called the Sylvian fissure. So, yeah, roughly above your ear. That area controls the face and mouth.
Okay, face and mouth on the side.
As you move up the side of the skull toward the very top, you get the arm and hand. And then as the brain curves over the apex and dips down into the middle, that deep crack between the two hemispheres called the longitudinal fissure.
Yeah.
That's where the trunk, legs, and feet are controlled.
Wait, hold on. So my feet, the things that are furthest away from my head, are controlled by the part of my brain that is tucked deepest inside the crack at the top.
That's right. The map is essentially upside down and folded over on itself.
It's so counterintuitive. But here's the part that always gets me when I look at these diagrams. It's not a democratic map, is it? I mean, my leg is huge. It's a massive piece of meat. My thumb is tiny. But on the brain map...
On the brain map, the thumb is a giant. The text calls this disproportionate mapping. And it's a critical concept.
It really is, because if you look at the diagram, more than half of the entire primary motor cortex is dedicated to just two things.
The hands and the muscles of speech.
So, if you were to draw a human based on how much brain power is assigned to each part, they'd have giant monster hands, huge lips, and a tiny little stick figure body.
Exactly. A grotesque cartoon. But think about why. What does your back actually do? I mean, on a fine motor level.
It holds me up. It bends a little. That's about it.
Right. It's gross motor movement. It doesn't require high-resolution control. Now think about your thumb or your tongue. The complexity of typing on a keyboard or articulating the word symbiosis, that requires thousands of micro-adjustments per second.
So the brain map isn't a map of physical size, it's a map of resolution or complexity.
Perfect way to put it. It's pixel density. The hands and mouth are 4K high definition. The back and legs are 8-bit Nintendo graphics. It's all about computational load.
Computational load. I like that. That makes perfect sense. The source also needs something interesting about this area. It says that point stimulation in these large execution areas, like for the hand and speech, rarely causes just one single muscle to contract.
Yeah, that's a common misconception. You'd think one neuron equals one muscle fiber.
Right. I assumed if I zapped one specific neuron, one muscle fiber in my thumb would fire.
But no, it usually excites a group of muscles. The brain doesn't think in terms of contract bicep fiber 402. It thinks in terms of functions. Grasp, open, speak.
So it's sending macro commands, initiate grasping protocol, and then lower-level systems break that down into the individual muscle movements.
That's a great way to think about it. The cortex is issuing the strategic command.
Okay, so that's the primary motor cortex, the executioner. But the CEO doesn't just execute orders, they have to plan them first. That brings us to the second area, the premotor area.
And this is located just in front of the primary motor cortex, about 1 to 3 centimeters anterior. And if the primary cortex is the one pressing the button, the premotor area is the one setting up the board.
Give me an example of the difference. If I'm reaching for that coffee cup again, who does what?
Okay, so the primary motor cortex is shouting the final commands. Contract fingers, flex bicep.
But the premotor area is the one saying, okay, before we do that, we need to position the shoulder like this and rotate the arm like that so the hand ends up in the right coordinate space.
So it's doing the setup work.
It creates the complex patterns of movement. It's the choreographer. The text mentions something about a motor image that sounds almost like visualization, like what an athlete does.
It is essentially that. It's fascinating. The anterior part of the premotor area develops a motor image of the total movement you want to achieve. It visualizes the end result.
So it sees the hand successfully holding the cup.
Exactly. Then, the posterior part of the premotor area takes that image, figures out the specific muscle patterns needed to match that image, and sends those instructions over to the primary motor cortex for execution.
So it imagines the success, then reverse engineers the steps to get there. That's incredible.
It is, and this is where the text brings up mirror neurons. Now, I know we hear about these in pop psychology all the time, but the source material is very specific about their role right here in the premotor area.
Yeah, usually people say, oh, mirror neurons, that's why I cry at movies, which might be part of it, but what is the actual physiological function here in motor control?
Well, these are special neurons that fire when you perform a specific task, sure. That's expected. But they also fire when you observe someone else performing that same task.
So if I watch you pick up that coffee cup, my premotor area is firing as if I'm doing it myself, without me actually moving.
Yes. Your brain is running a simulation. The source suggests this is fundamental for learning. It allows us to mirror the behavior of others to understand what they are doing and, crucially, to learn new skills.
Wow.
We transform sensory representations of acts we see into motor representations of acts we do.
That is wild to think about. It means that monkey see, monkey do isn't just a saying, it's a literal neurological mechanism. If I couldn't simulate your movement in my own head, I probably couldn't learn from you by watching.
Exactly. It's the biological basis of apprenticeship, of learning by observation.
Okay, so we have primary for execution, premotor for planning and imaging. What's the third sub-area of the cortex?
The supplementary motor area. This one is a bit different. It's tucked largely into that longitudinal fissure we mentioned earlier, so it's deep in the crack between the two halves of the brain.
In its specialty.
Its main role involves bilateral movements.
Bilateral meaning using both sides of the body at once.
Right. Think about climbing a ladder. You need the left hand and the right hand working in a coordinated alternating sequence.
Or grasping a heavy box with both hands.
Perfect example. The primary cortex on the left might control your right hand, and the one on the right controls your left. But the supplementary area coordinated them so they work together, applying equal force.
I see. So it's the team coordinator. The source also mentions it handles background posturing. What does that mean?
It's about setting the stage. So, fixating your head and your eyes on a target, positioning your trunk and your core muscles so that the finer movements of your arms and hands have a stable platform to work from.
Ah, so it's like setting the chassis of the car so the wheels can turn properly.
Yes, that's a really good way of putting it. It provides the foundational stability.
Okay, so we have the big three departments of the CEO. But looking at figure 56-3 in the text, there are these very specific little neighborhoods outlined on the map, specialized control regions. And some of these are famous.
They are. The most famous one, by far, is Broca's area.
The word formation area.
Right. And its location is no accident. It lies right in front of the primary motor cortex area that controls the face, the tongue, the larynx, all the machinery of speech.
And the distinction here is vital. If you damage Broca's area, it's not that your mouth is paralyzed.
Not at all. You can still chew, you can still swallow, you can still scream or make a sound.
So the hardware is fine, the muscles and nerves work.
The hardware is fine. But you lose the ability to speak whole words or coordinate speech into sentences. You lose the pattern generator for language.
It's like having a printer that works perfectly, all the mechanics are fine, but the computer can only send it garbled, nonsensical code.
That's it exactly. The instructions for how to say a word are corrupted. It's a condition known as aphasia.
That's terrifying. Just above that on the map, there's the voluntary eye movement field.
This does what it says. It controls voluntary eye direction.
Huh?
If you decide to look at the clock on the wall, this is the area that sends the command.
And what happens if this area is damaged?
You can't voluntarily look where you want. The source mentions that your eyes might involuntarily lock onto specific objects. You lose the ability to disengage your gaze. It's also involved in blinking.
And then there's another one that seems critical, the area for hand skills.
Yes. This one is crucial for us as a species. It's located just anterior to the primary motor cortex area for the hands. And if this gets damaged, we get a condition called motor apraxia.
I want to dig into apraxia for a second because it sounds so incredibly frustrating. What does that actually look like in a patient?
Imagine I hand you a hammer and a nail, and I say, show me how to use this. If you have motor apraxia, your hand muscles are strong. You can make a fist. You can grip the hammer tightly.
So there's no paralysis.
No paralysis at all. But when you try to use the hammer, your hand creates uncoordinated, non-purposeful movements. You might just tap it weirdly, or hold it backwards, or drop it. You have lost the skill programming.
It's like the file on your hard drive labeled howtohammer.exe has been deleted.
That is a perfect modern analogy for it. The hand works. The desire to do the task is there, but the program, the motor sequence, is gone.
Okay, so we've generated the command in the cortex, we've planned it, we've visualized it, we've coordinated both hands. Now we need to send that order down to the toes. Which brings us to part 2 of our journey, the highway.
The transmission of signals. And the main highway, the big one, is the corticospinal tract. You'll also see it called the pyramidal tract.
Why pyramidal? Is it shaped like a pyramid?
Sort of. When these massive bundles of nerve fibers pass through a part of the brainstem called the medulla, they form these distinct pyramid-shaped bumps on the surface. So early anatomists in the 1800s saw these bumps and named the whole pathway after them.
So functionally, it's the superhighway from the cortex to the spine.
Exactly. The most direct route.
And where does this highway start? Where are the on-ramps?
It's an interesting mix. You'd think it would all come from the primary motor cortex, the executioner.
Right.
But only about 30% of the fibers come from there. Another 30% come from the premotor and supplementary areas, the planners.
Okay, that makes sense. You need the plan and the execution order traveling together.
But and this is the part that usually surprises people, the other 40% come from the somatosensory areas.
Wait, sensory areas? The parts of the brain that feel things are sending motor signals down the main motor highway.
They're contributing to the signal.
Yeah.
And it highlights a key principle. You can't really separate sensing from moving. The brain treats them as part of the same process. The sensory input likely helps with feedback and modulation of the motor signal as it's being sent.
It's like the signal is carrying information about both what to do and how it should feel when it's done.
That's one way to look at it, yes.
Okay, so the signal starts from these different areas and it travels down. It passes through the internal capsule, which sounds like a sci-fi spaceship component.
The internal capsule is basically a bottleneck, a very important and very vulnerable bottleneck. All these fibers from the wide fan of the cortex get squeezed together to pass between two deep brain structures, the basal ganglia and the thalamus.
So it's a communications choke point.
A major one.
Yeah.
And that's a vulnerability, which we'll definitely come back to when we talk about strokes.
So they squeeze through the bottleneck, hit the brainstem, and then they do something that every high school biology student learns but rarely understands why. They cross over the decussation.
Yes, the great crossing. In the lower medulla, the vast majority of these fibers cross to the opposite side of the brainstem.
Which is why the left side of your brain controls the right side of your body and vice versa.
That is the anatomical reason right there. These crossed fibers then continue down the spinal cord as the lateral corticospinal tracts.
Do any of them stay on the same side? Or is it a full swap?
A small number of fibers don't cross. They stay on the same side and form the ventral corticospinal tracts. They mostly seem to be involved in controlling bilateral postural movements, keeping the center of the body, the trunk, stable. But the main limb control, the fine stuff, that all crosses over.
Now, inside this superhighway, the source makes a point to mention these very specific, very special cells, the giant Betz cells.
The Betz cells, these are the Ferraris of the nervous system, the special forces.
How so? What makes them so special?
Well, for one, they are found only in the primary motor cortex. Nowhere else. They are also huge for a neuron, about 60 micrometers in diameter. And most importantly, they are fast.
How fast are we talking?
They can transmit signals at about 70 meters per second.
70 meters per second, that's what, over 150 miles per hour?
Exactly. In terms of nerve conduction, that is blazing speed. These are for the signals where timing is absolutely critical. Think about a drummer or a concert pianist.
But here's the reality check the text gives us, which I found fascinating. There are only about 34,000 Betz cells in each tract.
All right, 34,000 sounds like a lot until you remember what the text says next.
Which is that the entire tract has over 1 million fibers.
So the Betz cells, these Ferraris, they're only about 3% of the total traffic on the highway.
So what are the other 97%? Are they just riding bicycles?
You could think of it that way. They are smaller fibers, slower fibers. They carry background tonic signals, they carry feedback, they carry the basic instructions. The Betz cells are the special forces. You only call them when you need high-speed, high-precision execution. The rest of the army is just holding the line.
That puts a lot of pressure on those 34,000 cells. Now, is this the only way down? What if the highway gets blocked? Does the CEO have a back road?
There is an alternative route, an accessory pathway, and that involves the red nucleus.
Which sounds like a location in a spy thriller. Meet me at the red nucleus, come alone.
It does. It's a structure located in the mesencephalon, or midbrain, and it works very closely with the corticospinal tract. It receives a lot of fibers directly from the cortex, and it even has its own map of the body, just like the motor cortex does.
So it's like a mini motor cortex, a backup generator.
In a way, yes. It has its own pathway down to the spinal cord, called the rubrospinal tract. Together, the main corticospinal tract and this rubrospinal tract form what's called the lateral motor system. They work as a team.
Why do we have two? Is it just redundancy? Is it a spare tire?
It's more about evolution. The corticospinal pathway, the red nucleus route, is an older system. It's what a lot of lower animals rely on for their motor control. The text notes that if the corticospinal tract, the main highway, is damaged,
The red nucleus can take over.
it can take over to some degree. The signals can be rerouted through it.
To what degree? Can I still play the piano with just my red nucleus?
No. And that's the crucial catch. If you lose the corticospinal tract, but you keep the red nucleus, you can still move your arms. You can still shape your hand to grasp something. Discrete movements are possible, but you lose fine finger control.
So I could grab an apple, but I couldn't button my shirt.
That's the perfect distinction. You would still have wrist movement, but the individuated, precise movements of the fingers would be gone. The red nucleus is good for grasp and hold, But the corticospinal tract, especially those BET cells, is what gave humans that incredible dexterity to manipulate tools, to write, to thread needles.
So the red nucleus is the monkey brain, and the corticospinal tract is the human upgrade that allows for fine craftsmanship.
That's a great summary. Red nucleus equals grasping, corticospinal equals precision.
Let's move on to the mechanics of execution. We've sent the signal down the wire. How does the cortex itself actually process the go command? The text talks about vertical columns. This gets into the architecture.
Right. This is about the microarchitecture of the cortex. The neurons aren't just a random soup of cells. They are arranged in these tightly organized vertical columns with thousands of neurons in each column.
And each column acts like a single processing unit, a microchip.
Exactly. Think of each column as an integrative processing system. It acts like a committee or a logic gate. It takes in multiple inputs from the senses, from the planning areas, from other columns, and it computes an output.
And it also functions as an amplifier.
Yes, that's a key point from the source. It says you need 50 to 100 of these pyramidal cells to be excited simultaneously just to trigger a downstream muscle contraction.
So one neuron firing isn't enough to do anything. You can't have a rogue neuron deciding to move my finger.
No, it's a democratic vote within the column. The committee has to reach a quorum. Are we moving? Yes or no? If enough cells vote yes, the signal goes out with enough strength to make something happen.
And once they decide to move, do they all fire the same way? Or is there more nuance to the signal itself?
There's much more nuance. This is a key distinction that explains how we lift things with control. Dynamic versus static signals.
Okay, break that down for us.
Imagine you want to lift a heavy dumbbell off the rack. To get it moving, to overcome the force of gravity and inertia, you need a big initial burst of energy.
Right, an explosive force to get it started.
That's the job of the dynamic neurons. The source says they fire at a very high rate for a short period, just a fraction of a second. They cause the rapid development of force. But once the weight is up and you're holding it, you don't need to keep exploding.
Wait, if I kept exploding, I'd throw it through the ceiling.
Exactly. So the dynamic neurons, their job done, they quiet down. And the static neurons take over. They fire at a much slower, steadier rate. But they continue to fire as long as you need to hold the weight up. They provide the force for holding the contraction.
So every single voluntary movement is a handoff from the sprinters to the marathon runners.
That is a beautiful analogy, yes. A burst from the dynamic cells, followed by a sustained signal from the static cells.
And does one part of the brain specialize in one or the other?
It seems so. The text notes that the red nucleus has a higher proportion of dynamic neurons, while the primary motor cortex has more static ones, which might suggest the red nucleus is more involved in that initial kick of starting a movement.
That's fascinating. Now, here's a question that I think we often overlook. The brain sends the signal. Close hand around cup. How does the brain know the muscle actually listened? And how does it know if I'm gripping a delicate paper cup versus a heavy ceramic mug?
The feedback loop. This is so important. The text calls it servo assist.
Servo assist sounds like power steering in a car.
It's a very similar principle. It's an assisted system. When signals go down to the muscle, signals are also constantly coming back from the periphery.
From where, specifically?
From muscle spindles, which measure muscle stretch, from Golgi tendon organs, which measure tension, and critically, from tactile receptors in your skin.
Let's use our coffee cup example. Give me the play-by-play of how this feedback loop works.
Okay, you reach for the cup. The instant your fingers touch the surface, the compression of the skin on your fingertips sends signals racing back up the spinal cord to the motor cortex.
And what does the cortex do with that information?
It creates a positive feedback loop. That sensory signal from your skin effectively says, we have made contact with the target, increase the gain. This signal then excites the motor neurons even more.
So touching the object automatically makes me grip harder.
Yes. It causes the muscles to contract tighter to ensure you have a firm grip. If you didn't have this, your hand might just passively rest on the cup, and as soon as you tried to lift it, the resistance from the weight would make it slip.
So my brain detects the contact, anticipates the need for more force, and ramps up the power before I even consciously register it.
Exactly. You don't have to consciously think, the cup is slipping, I should squeeze 10% harder. Your skin tells your brain, and your brain tells your muscles, and it happens in milliseconds. It's an automatic gain control for your grip.
That is incredibly sophisticated. But as with all complex machines, things break. And this brings us to the clinical side of things, which I think is where all this anatomy becomes really tangible. Let's talk about strokes.
Right. This is where understanding the anatomy becomes vital for medicine. We hear about strokes all the time, but physically, what is happening?
A blockage, right, a clot.
Usually, a ruptured blood vessel or a thrombosis, which is a clot, that cuts off blood supply to a part of the brain. And in the motor system, this often happens in that internal capsule we mentioned, the bottleneck.
Because all the fibers are so tightly packed there.
Exactly. A very small clot in that specific spot can knock out a huge amount of function, severing the connection between the cortex and the brainstem.
Now, the text makes a distinction that I found really confusing at first. It talks about what happens if you have a very clean, precise removal of only the primary motor cortex versus what happens in a typical, messy, real-world stroke.
This is a nuance that even medical students often struggle with, but it's key to understanding what you see in patients. Let's start with the theoretical case. A clean surgical removal of only the primary motor cortex, what they call area pyramidalis.
Okay, so just the CEO's execution office is gone, the planning departments and everything else are intact.
Right. The result in that case is loss of voluntary control of discrete movements. You can't wiggle your fingers or make fine motions. And very importantly, the muscles become hypotonic.
Hypotonic means floppy, limp.
Yes. Low tone, flaccid. The limb would be very loose.
But wait a minute, that's not what you typically see. I visited relatives who had strokes. Their arm wasn't floppy, it was rigid. It was curled up tight against their chest, the fist clenched. That's the opposite of floppy.
Exactly. That is called muscle spasticity. And this is the aha moment in the chapter. A real-world stroke is messy. It's not a precise surgical tool. It rarely affects just the primary cortex. It usually damages the basal ganglia and the other accessory motor pathways that travel nearby.
And why does that extra damage cause rigidity? It seems so backwards. Why does more damage make the muscle work too much?
Okay, think of the brainstem motor nuclei, which we'll get into next, as wild horse.
Yeah.
It's powerful, and its natural tendency is to be active. It wants to run. It wants to constantly excite your muscles to stand up against gravity.
Okay, so its default state is on.
Very much so. Normally, the cortex and these accessory pathways we mentioned hold the reins to that horse. They are constantly sending inhibition signals down to the brainstem. They're saying, easy boy, relax, don't contract yet, wait for my command.
So the normal state of the brainstem is go, and the cortex is constantly saying, wait.
Yes. It's a system of active inhibition. Now imagine a large stroke happens. It doesn't just cut the go signals. It also cuts the reins. It cuts the wait signals. The inhibition is gone.
The horse runs wild.
The brainstem becomes disinhibited. It's freed from its cortical master, so it becomes spontaneously, uncontrollably active. And it just blasts the anti-gravity muscles with contract, stand up, fight gravity signals. 247. That's spasticity.
That completely changes how I visualize a stroke. It's not just a loss of power, it's a loss of control over the power that's already there, deep in the brainstem.
Precisely. It's a release of a more primitive, powerful system.
That is a perfect transition to the foundation itself, the brainstem. We've been talking about it as the wild horse or the facility manager. Let's meet the team that lives down there.
Right. The brainstem consists of the medulla, the pons, and the mesencephalon. And as we said, it's the master of vegetative functions, breathing, cardiovascular control. But for movement, it is the master of standing up.
The war on gravity.
It truly is a war. Gravity is a constant force trying to pull you into a puddle on the floor. And the brainstem has two opposing systems that are in a constant tug of war over your muscle tone to keep you upright.
Okay, introduce the combatants.
In the blue corner, we have the pontine reticular nuclei. They're located a bit more anteriorly and laterally in the brainstem, in the pons. Their mission is excitation.
They are the stand-up squad, the anti-gravity team.
Yes. They transmit powerful excitatory signals down to the spinal cord via the pontine reticulospinal tract. Their job is specifically to excite the anti-gravity muscles, the muscles of the vertebral column and the extensor muscles of the limbs. The pontine system wants your legs straight and your back rigid. It wants you to be a pillar. And the text notes it has a high degree of natural excitability.
It's always ready to go. Okay, so in the red corner, there must be an opposing force.
There is. The medullary reticular nuclei. They're located more ventrally and medially. Their mission is inhibition, relaxation.
And they send their signals down a different path.
A different parallel path, the medullary reticulospinal tract. And it transmits inhibitory signals to those same anti-gravity muscles. It's the counterbalance to the pontine system. It tells muscles, okay, that's enough tension, relax a bit.
So standing upright isn't a passive thing at all. It's a dynamic tension. It's two people pulling on a rope with equal force to keep it perfectly still.
Exactly. And your ability to move fluidly, to sit down or bend over, depends on the cortex being able to tip that balance. The cortex normally sends signals to support the inhibitory medullary system, allowing the pontine system to be overridden.
But in the stroke patient.
The cortical support for the medullary inhibitory system is gone. So the naturally excitatory pontine system wins the tug-of-war, unopposed.
Resulting in spasticity. It all connects.
It all connects.
Now, the brainstem can't do this alone. It's fighting gravity, but it needs data. It needs a sensor to tell it which way is down. This brings us to what might be the most mind-bending part of the chapter, the vestibular system, the gyroscope in your ear.
This is one of the most elegant pieces of engineering in the entire human body, the vestibular apparatus. It's a tiny, delicate organ, but it's so important that it's encased in the petrous part of the temporal bone, which is the hardest, densest bone in the body.
The body built a vault for it.
It did. And inside this bony labyrinth is the membranous labyrinth.
Before we get into the ions and the cells, can we just picture the physics here? Because the way this works is almost purely mechanical, which I find so cool.
It is entirely mechanical. It's physics translated into neurology.
Okay, so we have two main systems in the vestibular apparatus, the utricle and saccule, and the semicircular canals. Let's start with the utricle and saccule. What is their job?
Their job is to tell your brain the orientation of your head with respect to gravity. This is static equilibrium. Are you upright? Are you leaning forward? Are you lying down on your side? They detect linear acceleration and head tilt.
And they do this with rocks.
Literally, yes. Tiny biological rocks.
Yeah.
Inside these two chambers, the utricle and saccule, there is a sensory area called the macula.
Okay.
This macula is covered in a gelatinous layer. Think of it like a layer of thick jelly. And embedded in the top of that jelly are thousands of tiny calcium carbonate crystals. The text calls them statoconia.
So I have heavy little crystals sitting on top of a patch of jelly inside my skull.
You do. And because they are calcium carbonate, they are much denser and heavier than the fluid that surrounds them. They have inertia and weight. So if you tilt your head forward to look at your phone,
Gravity pulls the crystals forward, making them slide.
the heavy crystals slide forward, dragging the jelly with them. And embedded in that jelly, projecting up into it, are the tips of thousands of tiny hair cells.
So the rocks pull the jelly bends the hairs.
And the bending of the hair is the electrical switch. That's the moment of transduction from a physical force to a neural signal.
Let's zoom in on that switch. Figure 5610 in the source shows this in detail. It's not just random bending, is it?
No, it's highly directional. Each hair cell has a whole tuft of small cilia called stereocilia, and then one large single king cilium called the kinocilium. This big one acts as the directional marker for the whole bundle.
So if the rocks drag the jelly and bend the small hairs toward the king,
It physically pulls open tiny ion channels at the base of the hairs. It's like pulling on rope that opens a little trapdoor. Positive ions from the surrounding fluid pour into the cell. The cell depolarizes, it fires. It sends a signal to the brain saying, tilting this way.
and if they bend away from the kinocilium,
The little ropes go slack, the trapdoor slams shut, the cell hyperpolarizes, the signal stops, or at least reduces dramatically.
so by looking at the pattern, which specific hair cells across the macula are firing and which are silent, the brain can construct a perfect high-resolution map of exactly how the head is tilted.
Precisely. And the utricle's macula is oriented horizontally, so it's best at detecting your head position when you are upright. The saccule's macula is oriented vertically, so it's more important for telling you your head orientation when you're lying down.
So if I'm lying in bed in the pitch dark, the reason I know for a fact that I'm lying down is because the rocks in my saccule are dragging the jelly sideways across the hair cells.
That is exactly right. It's your personal gravity detector.
That's amazing, but that's just static position or linear movement. What about when I'm moving? What about when I spin around in a desk chair? That's a different kind of motion.
A very different kind. And that's the job of the semicircular ducts.
The three rings. And they're arranged at right angles to each other, like the corner of a box, X, Y, and Z axis.
Exactly. One for each plane of 3D space. One for nodding yes, one for shaking no, and one for tilting your head side to side. Together, they can detect rotation in any possible direction.
Now, these don't use rocks. What's the mechanism here?
They use fluid dynamics. The ducts are filled with a fluid called endolymph.
Okay, let me try an analogy. Picture a cup of coffee in a car cup holder.
That is the perfect analogy. The duct is the cup. The endolymph fluid is the coffee. If the car suddenly accelerates forward, what does the coffee do?
It sloshes toward the back of the cup. Or rather, it feels that way. Really, it's staying put while the cup moves forward around it, so it hits the back rim.
Inertia. That is exactly how the semicircular canals work. If you rotate your head to the left, the fluid inside the corresponding duct wants to stay stationary due to inertia. So, relatively speaking, the fluid flows to the right in the opposite direction of the head movement.
And what detects that flow? There's no statoconia.
Right. At the base of each duct, there's a swelling called the ampulla. And inside that, there is a structure called the cupula. Imagine a little gelatinous sail or a swinging door made of jelly that blocks the entire path of the duct.
So the fluid sloshes, hits the sail, and bends it.
And embedded in that gelatinous sail are the hair cells. So bending the cupula bends the hair cells inside it, triggering the exact same kind of signal as in the macula. We're rotating left.
So rocks for linear gravity, fluid for angular rotation. It's so elegant. But the source text emphasizes something it calls the predictive function of the semicircular canals. This was the part that really blew my mind.
This is arguably the most critical function of the ducts, and it's what separates a good balance system from a great one. Think about the coffee cup in the car again. The coffee only sloshes when the car's speed changes.
Right. When it accelerates or brakes.
But once you're driving at a steady 60 miles per hour, the surface of the coffee is perfectly flat again. The semicircular canals work the same way. They only detect changes in rotation, acceleration, or deceleration. They don't tell you, I am leaning 20 degrees. They tell you, I am starting to fall.
And why is that distinction so important?
Because it's an early warning system. By the time the rocks in the utricle slide far enough to tell you you're now leaning at a dangerous angle, you might already be halfway to the ground. The fluid in the canals moves instantly at the very start of the fall, at the moment of angular acceleration.
So it's not a status report, it's an alert.
It predicts the loss of equilibrium. The text says it sends an alert signal to the brain saying, warning, we're accelerating forward into a fall. And the brain can then send immediate corrective signals to the leg muscles to catch the fall before it actually happens.
So if we didn't have this predictive system,
You would be incredibly clumsy. You'd always be reacting too late. The text notes that if you damage a part of the cerebellum called the flocculonodular lobes, which are the primary processors for these specific signals, you lose this predictive ability. You try to turn a corner too fast and just fall over because your brain wouldn't anticipate the centrifugal force and lean into the turn.
it's the difference between a reactive system that corrects errors and a proactive predictive system that prevents them from happening in the first place.
Exactly. It's a game changer for stability.
Let's connect this to the rest of the body.
Yeah.
Part 7, connections and reflexes. The ear sends the signal. Where does it go first?
It goes from the vestibular nerve to a cluster of neurons called the vestibular nuclei in the brainstem. This is the central processing hub for balance. From there, signals shoot off in several important directions.
The main one being down to the muscles, right?
Right. It goes down the spinal cord, through the vestibulospinal tracts, to control those anti-gravity muscles we talked about earlier.
So it's working with the pontine and medullary systems.
It's providing them with the critical real-time data they need. If your head tilts to the right, the vestibular system screams at the extensor muscles on the right side of your body to stiffen up and catch the weight. It also has a very close relationship with the neck proprioceptors.
Right, the sensors in the neck. Why does it need to talk to the neck specifically?
For context,
Yeah.
imagine you are sitting perfectly still in a chair and you just tilt your head to the side to stretch your neck. Your vestibular system is firing, saying we are tilting, but you aren't falling.
Right. The rest of my body is stable.
Exactly. The sensors in your neck muscles tell the brain, hey, just so you know, the head is tilted relative to the body, but the body itself is perfectly upright. The brain can then subtract the neck angle from the vestibular angle to get the true picture of your body's orientation in space.
So it can tell the difference between my head is tilted but my body is straight versus my whole body is tipping over.
Precisely. Without that neck data, you wouldn't know if you were falling or just looking sideways.
And what about the eyes? This is a big one. If I spin my head, the world doesn't just blur into a mess. My vision stays remarkably stable.
That's the vestibulo-ocular reflex, or VOR. And this is pure, beautiful hardwiring. When your head turns to the left, signals go from the vestibular nuclei through a neural pathway called the medial longitudinal fasciculus, directly to the nuclei that control your eye muscles.
And it tells the eyes to do what?
It tells them to rotate to the right, at the exact same speed that your head is rotating to the left.
So they perfectly cancel each other out.
They do. It keeps the image of the world stable on your retina. It's basically biological image stabilization, just like in a GoPro or a high-end camera. but it evolved millions of years ago, and it works flawlessly without you ever thinking about it.
It's incredible that all of this is happening continuously. I'm nodding my head right now as I'm talking, and my canals are sloshing, my neck is firing, my eyes are stabilizing, and I'm not consciously aware of any of it.
Your conscious mind is free to think about the podcast because this incredible ancient machinery is handling the physics of existing in a gravitational field.
Before we wrap up, I want to touch on one specific case study in the text. It's a bit heavy, but I think it really drives home the point of how powerful this lower brain, the brainstem, really is. The anencephaly case.
This is a tragic congenital condition, but scientifically it offers a unique window into the nervous system. Anencephaly is a condition where a baby is born without the brain structures above the mesencephalon.
So no cerebral cortex, no CEO, no conscious mind as we would understand it.
Correct. The forebrain and cerebrum are missing. The skull is often not fully formed. But, and this is the shocking and illuminating part, these infants can be born alive.
Obviously the heart beats and they breathe because we know that's a brainstem function.
But it's so much more than that. The text lists what they can do based on observations. They can yawn, they can stretch, they can cry, they can suckle to feed.
That suckling reflex alone requires complex coordination of the tongue, jaw, and throat muscles?
It does. And get this, the text says they can follow objects with their eyes and even with head movements. If you press on the sole of their foot, they withdraw their leg.
And that is all coming from the brainstem.
That is all brainstem and spinal cord. It proves that the foundation, the facility manager, isn't just a passive basement. It is fully capable of controlling the majority of our stereotypic life-sustaining behaviors all on its own.
It's like the autopilot on a plane. The pilot, the cortex, might set the destination and handle the takeoff and landing. But for most of the flight, the autopilot is the one keeping the plane in the air, handling the turbulence, and managing the fuel flow.
And in the case of these infants, the autopilot is flying the plane with no pilot in the cockpit. It can't go to a new destination, it can't learn to do math or plan for the future, but it can fly the plane on its pre-programmed routes.
This brings us to the final thought, the so what of this entire deep dive.
We've traveled from the thought in the frontal lobe down the giant BET cells at 150 miles per hour. We've seen the crossing of the pyramids, the backup generator in the red nucleus, and that constant tug of war in the brainstem that's keeping you from falling out of your chair right now.
And we've looked inside the ear at the delicate dance of crystals and fluid that tell us where we are in space.
Understanding this machinery, it changes how you view yourself. When you see someone recovering from a stroke, struggling with that rigid spastic arm, you now know it's because the inhibitory brakes from the cortex have been cut. The brainstem's horse is running wild.
And when you spin around and get dizzy, you know it's because the fluid in your semicircular canals is still spinning from inertia even though your head is stopped, and your cupula is sending confused signals to your brain, which is trying to make your eyes move to match a rotation that isn't happening.
It really is a machine. A wet, biological, impossibly complex electrical machine.
But that anencephaly case leaves me with a lingering, almost philosophical question. If the brainstem can handle eating, breathing, crying, looking around, and reacting to pain, if the autopilot is that capable, what exactly is the conscious mind, the cortex, adding to the active movement?
That is the ultimate question of neuroscience, isn't it? Are we the CEO who micromanages every single detail? Or are we just the CEO who signs off on the memo that says, pick up coffee, and then an entire corporation of brilliant autonomous workers below us does all the actual complex labor without our input?
Or are we just the passenger watching the autopilot fly the plane and taking credit for it? It's something to think about the next time you reach for that cup.
Indeed.
That's it for this deep dive into the motor system. Thanks for listening.
Close your eyes for a second, tilt your head, and just try to visualize those crystals sliding. See you next time.